There's always a little technical hitch. And what it does, it just reveals your humanity. And that's what it does. So I just apologize, but that's my guest book. And I will bring on Mr. James Sale in a minute just to thank you so much for joining me and giving me the privilege of your time. It's very much appreciated. One of the wonderful things about doing this cannot be overestimated is that you get to meet some interesting people, and then what happens is that other people that you know then say, I think you need to speak to this person who I know. And one of the privileges of meeting people, talking to people, is that you get a chance to speak to other creative people who, in my opinion, are using their skills to point in a certain direction. And that's why I want to talk to James, because I find some of this a subject that's also quite close to my heart in regard to what he touches on. But I'm rather intrigued by his approach. So, James Sale, welcome to the podcast. I do apologize about my little technical glitch, which this just shows the reality of that we are dealing with, and that we are human when we are using these wonderful things called computers. And I try not to turn my laptop into a frisbee, as I pointed out. So, James, thank you so much for joining me, sir.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Mark. It's a real privilege and a pleasure to be here with you. And I'm so pleased. I mean, in fact, in terms of the hit, really, it was just the god Hermes, the god of communication and liminal spaces, who was actually trying to interrupt us. But, that's one of the mischievous things about Hermes. He's a bit of a trickster. He's a bit of a fraudster god. So that's all it was. The gods were just simply working their way in our system.
I hear you, and I hear that reference to Greek mythology before Christ. So this is interesting. It's going to be an interesting discussion. James, according to your bio, and I have read bits, I confess, that there is a confession from you that you have been for 30 years looking at lecturing on, I think, or speaking about management, the motivation of managers, motivation, how do they then motivate within the constraints of their job and the people that they're employing. So you could you tell us about who you are, which is not a cheap trick to saying I haven't read anything, because I
No,
have. But
no.
if you could tell us who you are, what you get up to, etc., that would be fantastic.
Oh, well, I'll try and be brief because, stuff about yourself it could be a bit tedious for other people. But essentially, I was a teacher for 15 years. I ended up as a deputy headmaster of two large state schools, and I left in 1995. So I had a background in teaching. And as a result of that, I'd had a number of books published, including a best-selling book, York Notes Macbeth. So if you've got a 15, 16-year-old child who's doing GCSEs and you want to study Macbeth, then the best-selling book by me is actually Macbeth. But so I wrote a number of educational books, and I left education and I went into management consultancy, training and coaching. And I've been doing that for 30 years. And 20 years ago, I founded a business called Motivational Maps, which is an online diagnostic which measures, gives a language to describe and a metric to measure motivation itself. And why that's important is because what I discovered in the work that I was doing was, people tend not to want to buy motivation. Everyone claims to want to have it, but to actually spend hard cash on buying it is not what they want. It's what they call in the trade a feature. What people want to buy is a benefit. And you've got to ask yourself, so what is the benefit of having motivation? And the answer is, both from a company or organizational point of view and from a personal point of view, it's performance. Everybody wants more performance because performance leads to productivity. And from a business point of view, it leads to greater profits if the strategy is going in the right direction. So performance is made up of three essential components. One is what I call direction. In other words, the strategy, the objectives, the goals. Are we going in the right direction with our organization? The second thing are the skills and knowledge, which is actually where 90% or more of the budgets of any organization spend their money in order to actually try to upskill people, up-knowledge people, to keep ahead of the game. And the missing ingredient, so it's like a car. You have a car, and the steering wheel takes you in the direction. Now, you told me today that you live in Scotland. I live in the south of England. So, if I want to go to Scotland, if I start going west, I'm really not going to make it to Scotland. So the strategy is really important. But the actual skills and knowledge are what you call the chassis of the car, and the actual engineering of the car and how it's built. Is this a really great model? Is this a Reliant Robin, or is this a Mercedes? What is the skill level you've got here? But even given the right strategy, even given the right skills and knowledge, if there's no fuel in the tank, which is motivation, see, motivation is energy. So what I've focused on for 20 years has been this energy question. And what I run as a business is we have got over 1,400 coaches, consultants, and trainers in 16 countries who are actually licensed by us to use this product in programs of leadership, team building, career choices, etc., to actually enhance the motivational experience, to actually measure where they are now, and then to have a plan to take them to the next level of motivation. And this is what I would call foundational. Loads of people will advise you on your strategy. Loads of people are there talking about skills and knowledge, but actually, there's a lot of rah-rah about motivation, but there's not a language and a metric, and that is what we supply. So that is what I do. And just because I like you, Mark, and because we're on air live, I'll certainly send you a complimentary link so that you can experience it. It takes 12 minutes to do online. You get a 15-page report which outlines, and here's something you're going to love. I mean, I've got over 1,400 coaches, and I've had, top people in this field doing this product. Very, very few people can actually predict what motivates them. It's surprising. People think they know what motivates them, and then they do the test. What I'm saying is that most people do not know what motivates them, and in fact, it comes as a surprise when they learn it. But the vast majority of people say, wow, actually, I now see that is what motivates me. So in a sense, my tool is really enhancing people's self-awareness. It's quite an important thing. To know what motivates you is to actually be able to feed your own motivation so that you stay highly energized. And to stay highly energized means that you stay alive, because life is in the energy. It's in the energy that we have. That's why dead people, we don't want to be dead, because actually they don't have a lot of energy. So we want to be alive. So you see people going to work and they're just kind of like zombies, because they're not motivated. There's no energy. They may know everything. They may know the strategy. They may have all the skills in the world, but they go to work and it's just tedious. And the stats, especially post-COVID, on people's engagement and motivation at work are dreadful. They sometimes go down to only 10% of people at work actually are motivated or engaged. I mean, it's quite staggering. So people are dying on a daily basis because they don't really enjoy what they're doing. So it's an important thing, I think. So that's a part of my work, is doing this motivational kind of work.
Well, one of the wonderful things about beginning our conversations is that, and I can see your passion in that. And there are a number of things that I'm immediately identifying with, because I'll throw this comment out. People often say they don't leave jobs, they leave a toxic atmosphere, or they leave toxic management, right?
Yes.
And then there's another classic comment that I love, and I can't think of the person who said it, which is, don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what you wish to do, what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is a bunch of people that have come alive, that are passionate. So when you are talking about that, and you and I have that in common, I spent 9 years teaching in secondary school. So this is intriguing. This is intriguing. School management is a program in itself, James. I think you would agree with that. Especially, here's the parallel, I suppose, especially when within the education teaching situation, is that people are only measured once a year. And when they're measured once a year by the results, they feel that the results that they are receiving in regard to GCSEs, sometimes that is not very motivational, right? There are other things to then manage that by. So, James, what in all your work then within this field, what is the number one thing that motivates people? What are you trying to put over? I know this could be quite a huge question.
Topic. But let me
Yeah.
just try to. I'm going to answer it directly in a second way. But let me answer the first way, saying, and in our system, what we've established, and I won't go through the research that I did to actually establish it. In fact, I've got a. Where is it? It's here. So basically, I've got 5 books out with Routledge called the Mapping Motivation Sequence. I've got a 6th one coming out as well next year. But basically, Mapping Motivation lays out all the theory and all the academic references here. But essentially, there are 9 motivators that people have. We've got all 9 in our psyche, but for each person, they're in a different order and a different level of intensity. And they're in 3 groups of 3, and they're correlated with Maslow, and they're correlated with a guy called Edgar Schein's career anchors. Right. Essentially, there are 3 motivators which are heart or relationship type motivators. There are 3 motivators which are mind and head type motivators. And there are 3 motivators which are growth or body type motivators. And so what they are in sequence are, I won't give our technical names for them, but basically people either want security, they want belonging, they want recognition, they want control, they want money, material things, they want expertise, they want creativity, they want freedom, and they want meaning. Now, what influences our behavior is usually 3 out of those 9 in a hierarchical order.
Right.
So knowing what those top 3 things are, the key thing is to feed them. Now, if I leave that aside and answer the question directly, really directly, and reduce it all to one thing, which is what we don't do, but if I were to do that, because you're asking me theoretically to do it, William James, the father of American psychology, once observed very, very profoundly, he said, the deepest principle of human nature is the craving to, now notice that word craving, he didn't say the need, didn't say the want, he didn't say the desire, he said the craving, like it was a drug, the craving to be appreciated. So when you talked about what you did, people leave because actually they get no recognition, no appreciation. They're actually, all of us feel that this manager, this boss, this leader, is just simply taking us for granted.
Yeah.
So, what we have to think about when we actually employ people is we've got partners. I've got a wife, you've got a wife. Actual fact, if we just sort of treat them as cogs in the wheel, they're going to find somebody else who doesn't do that. And the same is true at work. We actually have to have a kind of intimacy that actually appreciates people at a deep level. And then they won't leave you. And then even they'll suffer bad conditions, poor pay, if they think they're contributing and there's this appreciation for them, they'll stay. So how do we get to a point where we psychologically are appreciating people?
I mean, we don't necessarily have time to discuss the Industrial Revolution, to discuss, but it's fascinating about why certain companies were set up, and Cadbury's what they then did, how they then treated their workers. The other thing is John Lewis Partnership. Now,
let me give you one I've worked for. Let me give you another one in the same mold, Clark's Shoes.
Yes.
In Somerset. I actually did quite a lot of work with them 20 years ago, and of course they were. And what do they have in common with Cadbury's? Quakers.
Yes,
they have a very deep religious ethic, deep religious ethic, which spilled out into really treating people as if they were people, and the effects of that were long-lasting, unbelievably so.
And for American viewers, we are discussing quintessentially British companies, and of course. Cadbury's, you will be well known for that, but it's that whole thing within the Industrial Revolution, how it then treated people, and another interesting, even though you and I would look at it from maybe a collectivization point of view, from a left wing point of view, and there were certain things that allude in your book that we will eventually get to discuss, is the Scott Robert Owens, and then how they then establish their factories, where they do that, how they treat people. So you are totally and utterly, James, in my mind, something that's very important to me. You're totally and utterly onto something. So you will remember that wonderful BBC show with John Harvey Jones, where he would go around and he would talk.
The troubleshooter.
Yeah, troubleshooter. And he would go around and talk to people. Now, he was invited in to companies to try and give advice about how they can improve, how they can survive, because you and I, one of the sad things was seeing the toy company Triang disappear, and he went in there then, and I went back there today because I was thinking, I love that show. And one of my favorite television shows with the visits he did was when he went into Morgan Cars. Now, you, within your motivation, within the Speak About Management, he goes in and he gives advice to Morgan, who completely ignore it. And then he went back a number of years later. And just to say, Morgan cars, of course, American viewers, you will be aware of that because there are many, many Morgan cars that are sold in America, but they are all hand produced. But what is fascinating, when he was talking about how you try and produce more cars within the confines of what you have, and then they stuck to the quality. I could be wrong, but I just wonder why you enjoyed that program. I love that interaction.
Well, I think we all of us, I mean, what John Harvey Jones was doing, essentially, is what a whole raft of people across the world are trying. I mean, if you think about a psychotherapist, a psychotherapist is somebody, you've got somebody coming to you and actually they're broken in some way. So the business is broken in some way. So there are two ways of measuring. So if we think about it from the point of organizations, so commercial businesses want to make profit. So it's about the profit. If it's a non-profit organization, it's about the value that it adds. But essentially, either one can be broken because they're not adding value or they're not making a profit. The same is true of a person. So, I am fascinated with, effectively, it's a kind of utopian project, isn't it? Human beings are fallen and they create civilizations which are broken. And then they seek to prevent the break. So the Tower of Babel was, in fact, this massive collective thing we can reach heaven, we can reach nirvana, we can reach utopia, we'll build this up. And they didn't, which is actually a nice cue onto my book about the Greek gods, because, of course, it's all about this utopia that people want to have. Now, realistically, the great thing about John Harvey Jones and why I liked it so much was, of course, he wasn't a utopian. What he was a really practical realist who could see the limits of human behavior and endeavor, and according to those limits, could advise them in a very sensible way. He had, I would call, the goddess Athene on his side. He was somebody who sought to be wise, and to be wise, you have to be humble. You have to subdue hubris, and you have to actually be open to the spirit, the inspiration, as well as the knowledge, in order to go and help people change what they're doing and renew themselves. So as with doctors with the body, psychotherapists with the mind, psychiatrists and everything else, what we're talking about is this fascination with how do we fix things? How do we fix people?
Absolutely. I mean, my sort of sarcastic thing against psychology or even counseling is the fact that maybe some of them don't want to fix people, otherwise their business model would end.
Yeah, well,
so that is something to then think about. But then
let me give you a model for you to think about that with as well. Right. See, everything starts off. Let's take education in the UK, but it's actually true in the US. I don't know the USA situation quite as well, but I've got enough friends in the States who've told me this is very parallel. We take education post the Second World War in the 50s, 60s, and possibly the most of the 70s. What we could describe it as, it was a vision. We had a vision in this country that education was going to be available for all, that that everyone would be given a chance, and the most talented could really go to the top, and actually meritocracy, they could perform. Now, by the time we get to the 80s, the vision that we have for education has changed. And what does it become? It's become a business. So actually, the visionary nature, which is actually highly motivating, where you get idealists who go, it's sort of, the people who go and become missionaries and go around the world, and because they're visionary, right? Suddenly it's a business. But so you go from vision to business, and then finally, when you've had enough of the business, it becomes a racket. So what we've got in the UK at the moment is a racket.
Right.
A racket in which vice chancellors are getting £500,000 a year for what exactly? A racket in which actually the indigenous population are being prevented from going to university because they get higher fees from external people. And the whole thing is run on the basis, and people are actually getting paid money for not actually running the courses. I mean, during COVID, the students didn't get their attention and they were still being charged the money for it. The whole thing is one big racket. And so, this ultimately is a meltdown. We reach a point of meltdown. We reach a point in the Greek God story where the order that Zeus established is about to be broken, and chaos beckons. And another word for chaos that the Greek myths tell us, in fact, the Hebrew stories would say the same as well, actually. But the thing it tells us is the other word for chaos is evil. What we have is evil.
It's very interesting. If I've got my Greek god right in regard to Zeus, is it the seat of Pergamon? Is it this altar that he then had?
Well, he was seated on Olympus, of course. And if I segue into the story, just so that your viewers can sort of get the sense of what this book's about. It's not a history from beginning to end of Greek myths. It starts at a very specific point, and it doesn't start at the beginning of the Greek myth. So it doesn't start with Uranus, the sky god, the earth goddess, and all this stuff. It doesn't go into the Titans, although they're frequently mentioned as a backstory. The thing about the world, and this is really psychologically and spiritually important to understand from their understanding of it, but it has got lots of resonances, for example, with Christianity. When you actually think about it, it's not as pure as Christianity, it's not as absolute as Christianity, but it's got a lot of resonance. So what in fact we start with is the point at which Zeus establishes his rule as the king of the universe, the king of the cosmos.
Yep.
Now, he overthrows his own father, but his own father, Kronos, has overthrown his father, Uranus. So you could say, well, it's just one thing after another. It's the same thing happening again. No, it's not the same thing happening. What we've got to really understand is that when Zeus takes control of the universe, for the first time, order is established in the universe. It's equivalent to the moment where God said, let there be light, and there was light. And light has got to be understood not just as a physical manifestation, but always in the ancient world, light was understood as being intellectual understanding. Now, there's a profound difference between the Christian idea of God, because actual fact, the Christian God, the unknowable God who cannot be comprehended, existed before understanding itself existed. So, in fact, it's actually very, very deep. But in the Greek story, at the point at which Zeus establishes, see, the thing about order is, before he had the order, it was dog eat dog. It was an animal world of sheer power. But once he established the order, here's the thing, he's bound by it. Zeus himself is not a despot. He's not able to do whatever he likes. If he swears an oath on the river Styx, he's bound by it. He's bound by other things.
Right.
There are prophecies. And so 6 or 7 important things emerge from establishing order. The first is the order itself. The second, from that comes law. Then we get justice. Then we get hierarchy. And that's a profound thing. It's so against equality, equity, and all these movements which are trying to ground everybody down to the same level. Hierarchy is absolutely essential for life. Jordan B. Peterson said in one of his books, hierarchy has been around for about 4.6 billion years. It precedes the trees. Nothing is equal. And from having hierarchy established on justice, you get peace. From peace, you get stability. And here's something else the book goes into a lot of detail is from that, you get a seventh quality, which is absolutely extraordinary. And what is that seventh quality? It is you get beauty. You get beauty. In fact, we go right back to the beginning. Order itself is beautiful. What is order? It's form. And this is, of course, and this leads on to a big discussion about modern art and modern poetry and the formlessness, which has got no beauty and no meaning. We have to return to form.
I have to say that if I was working under you as a headmaster, I would be quite intrigued, and I would also find it rather motivating because I could see that, and you just touching on that education. This whole thing, then, what do we do with the term free thinkers, and where were we at with that thought in regard to, say, the education within this country? And I agree with you. It is a
it's a very difficult question to actually answer. But I mean, free thinkers tends to mean people who actually have forgotten that all creativity and all life come from limitation. So actually having limits is what gives us freedom. So, for example, to take a simple example that I know you're married, I'm married as well. But, when you marry your partner, whoever that is, you actually forego freedom in order to be free to love. And the love creates a new order of freedom for you. So when people talk about free thinkers, actual fact, they pride themselves on being open to anything. But by being open to anything and by not limiting themselves, actually, they are chaotic. Free thinking is effectively chaos thinking. Another word for the chaos, as I've said earlier, it's a kind of evil thinking.
And I hear you on that, and again, and I love that definition of that, and appreciate the challenge of that. So what was because I had dipped into your book, and I'll ask you this. What was your motivation then for writing this? Because in our discussion so far, there is a number of things that you're pulling in. You've been pulling in your passion for motivation, I believe, good management, right? Good management of people. You and I can easily discuss the 1970s because we're that old, but we can discuss the 1970s. We can discuss the industrial action of the 1970s. You and I remember the company, British Leyland and all the rest, and Red Robbo in Birmingham. But we also will then sadly remember the amount of days that were lost in regard to strikes and socialist anarchy, in my opinion, not wanting to put words in your mouth. So what was your motivation, looking at that, using your word, what was your motivation as a genuine word and not as a pun back to you in regard to writing this book? Because I find it fascinating that you are bringing certain things in for people to think about. And also, you have also mentioned a couple of times this whole thing of order. What is your motivation for writing it, which you just, I think, finished last November, because you refer to that in regard to the eve of the American election?
Yes, I do. Yes.
What is your motivation for doing this?
Well, I think, firstly, I remember the 60s as well. I was at the Isle of Wight when Bob Dylan was there in the 60s. So, yeah, I mean, I go back a bit further than you, I think. Right, but it's just bragging rights there. It's just a little, I remember the 70s. I remember the 60s too. And I think, one thing to say to you is, I mean, obviously, I didn't actually come here to talk about motivation. You brought that up from my bio. So it's not, but I'm happy to oblige because, of course, but actual fact, over and above what I do for my living, I have been a writer for 60 years. I started when I was 13, and I've been a writer for 60 years. It's my primary mission. And I've had over 50 books published on education, on management, and poetry is where I started, and it's my first love. So poetry is really important to me. So when you ask me the question about what is my motivation, I mean, to give you a little bit about the god Apollo appears twice in 2 chapters of the book are named after the god Apollo. Apollo is the god of poetry, but he's also the god of healing, as well as the god of the sun and light. So there is actually an intimate relationship between poetry and healing, because both, and in fact, there are books out there which are actually all about how to heal yourself through poetry. You can actually get these kind of books. So here's the thing: for the psychologically healthy mind, what does it actually want? And what it wants is peace of mind. We all want peace of mind. In fact, in the Christian tradition, we have that wonderful expression, the peace of God that passes all understanding, that we want to get to at some point in our life. Now, here's the thing. The mind, as Dr. Johnson, one of my great heroes, and I quote this in the book, once said, the mind can only rest upon the stability of truth. So when we talk about this book, the mind actually has got 4 primary ways in which it accesses truth. 4 primary ways it accesses truth. It accesses truth through science, through reason, through intuition, and through the imagination. And since the Enlightenment, with the blip of the Romantics in the 19th century, that was a blip. But since the Enlightenment in the 18th century, the whole of Western culture has gone down the science and reasoning rationality line. And so by the time, and we can see this in our schools, and universities, by the time we reach now, science in particular, and reason with it, and rationality with it, have become like Premier League things. You know, they're so important. We've all got to pay attention to science and reason, and intuition and imagination have been relegated, not even to the 2nd division. They're somewhere down in the 3rd and 4th. There's hardly anything really considered. Myth itself is considered to be some sort of fairy story, as opposed to some truth that keeps recurring in human nature. Now, in writing the book, therefore, the answer to your question is, I am seeking to redress the balance whereby we bring back intuition and imagination through Greek myths into our thinking. Because, in fact, if we go to Ian McGilchrist's book, The Master and His Emissary, science and reason are really left brain activities. Intuition and imagination are right brain activities. And the master thinking is on the right brain, not the left. And what's happened is the Western culture has turned this completely around and made the right brain the servant of the left. We have got it completely the wrong way round. And Ayn Rand said, you know, we can ignore reality, but we can't ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. This is going to have some terrible consequences for us. And my book deals with some of these potential consequences, you know, in various chapters that deal with this, particularly the chapter on Hermes, for example. We have under-worshipped Apollo, the god of poetry and healing, and of prophecy and of light. And we have over-worshipped Hermes, the god of liminal spaces, communications, technology, fraudster, and theft. I mean, it's really quite amazing how we've done this. So the book goes into some actual real world examples. So I'm talking about the Greek gods, but all the time in all the chapters, there's modern stuff, political stuff, industrial stuff, business stuff, which is also educational stuff, informing this kind of debate that I'm setting up.
Well, what I'm very intrigued about the debate, and I put my cards firmly on the table, is that you are challenging people in regard to spiritual matters. You are asking people not just to look on an earthly level, but to look beyond that. Now, I have a specific worldview, but I am intrigued, especially when you're looking at the Greek culture, looking at Greek myths, Greek gods, and if I've got my information right, we're then looking at the decline of that by 30 BC. We're looking at that, and you would, in our discussion earlier, when I've recently been to Petra, and you were talking about that as an ancient civilization of the Nabateans. It's fascinating. There's a point that says to me, you are encouraging us to look back in history. We've got to look back in history and see where we have actually come from.
Yes. I am encouraging. That's a very important point. And I think, can I just add a corollary to it?
Yeah.
Which my book makes very plain. One of the myths of modern society is can be summed up in the word progress. That things are getting better. We're inevitably, we're going to conquer death. We're going to do this. We're going to go and live on the Mars. We're going to do all these things, right? But in fact, the ancient Greek view, and it's not just the Greeks, the Indians thought it as well, and the Aztecs thought it, was actually the world is degenerating. That there was a golden age, and this ties in with the Bible, of course, and the Garden of Eden, and the longevity of the patriarchs. People lived a lot longer in those days. So there was a golden age, which gave way to a silver age, which gave way to a bronze age. Heracles was in the golden age, Achilles was in the bronze age, and then we went to the iron age when actual savagery was the case. And we cannot assume we are making progress, but this bland assumption that we are just blinds people to what is going on in reality.
So how do we, when we're in this, James, I want to sort of take a really important turn, because I think also within your book, with what you raise, and I say DEI, diversity, equity, and
diversity, inclusion, and equity.
Yeah, that's it. I always get this wrong. But the key thing is that we are involved in this huge culture war, to say the least.
Yeah.
We within the UK, for viewers overseas, a few weeks ago, we had our Supreme Court giving an edict and confirming that there are only two sexes, male and female. The fact that we had to go to court over that, I mean, do me a favor. And that up to this point, we've got all the binary saying there are, hundreds of different sexes in between. Now, how these people work this out is another thing. So the fact that we have reached this point, James, and I think you begin to challenge people to think about the culture war, because we've already mentioned ancient civilizations. We're all talking about history. Where we're at, James, and also I find it fascinating because I agree from a biblical point of view, when we're talking about the earth declining, right? So within the culture war, James, where are we at? Can you believe some of the things that people believe? Can you believe what you are seeing around you now? I just wondered what your thoughts are on that.
Well, it is actually quite unbelievable. And I think I said to you earlier, and I'll say now, this is not in the book. What I'm about to say now is not in the book, because actually, I would like to write a book specifically on the Bible, to parallel this book. So this is a book on the Greek myths, but I'd like to do the same, particularly for the Old Testament, to write a book about explicating what some of this is about. But as I see it, where we are is we are actually in to take the Old Testament as a case in point, we're in Babylon. So the thing about it is, we mustn't give up hope. I mean, hope, because Pandora's box, that which is in the book. Hope is really vital. Trust is vital in God. In the Greek case, it's the Greek gods, but in the Christian case, it's the God who delivers. And one of the things about the delivery, and the same is true of the Zeus and the stories, is Zeus defeated the forces of chaos, but he didn't completely defeat them. And so on Earth, the divine sons of Zeus, Perseus, Heracles, to mention two, actually were carrying on the work of their heavenly father by defeating the monsters that were still alive on the earth, to try to rid the earth. But the story of the Hydra is very instructive. Heracles defeats the Hydra, the nine-headed monster, but one of the heads is immortal. One head is immortal. He cuts it off, but he can't kill it. So he buries it. And that is a metaphor for what is actually happening. No matter how many times on the earth, until the earth ends and we're in a different place altogether, no matter how many times you bury it, you think you've got rid of it, but it lives on. And strangely enough, the evil that Heracles buries finally becomes the cause of his own death. Because like Saruman and various other people in Lord of the Rings, they tried to use the ring, or Boromir, they tried to use the ring, and the ring works against them. So Heracles, before he buries this head, takes poison out of it, lethal poison, to tip his arrows in to kill his enemies. One graze with this poison actually is lethal. And he goes on, kills loads of other people using this poison. But of course, ultimately, it's the same poison that's put onto the shirt that he wears that kills him.
Yeah.
So he tries to control the evil, but the evil ends up, like the ring in Lord of the Rings, controlling him. So we at the moment are in Babylon. And so the prophets Isaiah and Ezekiel talk about what does it mean to be in Babylon when the whole culture turns against you and what you've come to believe. But we have to also believe, as the Bible shows, that, the Israelites were defeated, the Jews went down, but there was always some new hero who arose to try to turn the tide. So we need to be part of that chain of people. If we're not the actual hero itself, and I wouldn't claim myself to be a hero, but if we're not the hero itself, we've got to help prepare the way for the hero or heroes, heroines, who are to come. And we do that in a number of ways. You're doing it with having a podcast. We do it by having a book out. We do it by actually our own personal example, by our own inspiration of other people. It's like it is again like Lord of the Rings. It's the little people that the Sarumans ignore and the Saurons ignore. They don't see these little people, but they're burrowing away, and suddenly they're at Mount Doom when they've got the ring, and they make a difference.
I hear you, and I'm reminded of of that verse that in Scripture that talks about the harvest is plenty, but the workers are few. Pray for workers,
Yes.
says the Lord of the harvest. Pray for workers. So in other words, if we actually care about what is happening within our culture, we have to engage. And one of the ways that you do, as you quite rightly said, with all the books, your poetry, and you write for the Epoch Times. I just want to throw that out. In that, this is really, really important in regard to the culture war. Making films, etc. This is what's really, really, really important. What is then? We've reached this point where the culture's turning around and saying, "We don't want your viewpoint, and we don't want your viewpoint, and we're not giving you a platform, and we don't want to listen to you." Because censorship is real. I've been censored, others, but that doesn't mean that we give up, right? At all. We keep pushing back. To me, as Scripture says, Ephesians 6 says that we're not fighting flesh and blood, but principalities and powers, which is fascinating. Well, it's true. Then that's why I find it absolutely fascinating when you are talking about the Greek gods. You made an interesting comment about light, and of course the illuminated ones. This whole thing that brings another discussion in regard for me in regard to other links that are not good, and that maybe certain businesses and people are then involved in. But James, how can we change? I come back to this using your experience. We look at what's gone in universities over the last few years. We see since October the 7th, we see, to me, which is very important, we see the demonstrations that we've seen within universities and all the rest. For some of us, we've been very shocked about that immediately. Others have not, as they've seen something that's gone through universities for a long time. How do we change what is going on within our universities? How do we level up the playing field, in my opinion, to not give such a sort of a left-wing mindset of collectivist virus? How do we do that, James, in this country?
Could you ask me a more difficult question? I mean, that's
I really, James, I'll work on it. I do apologise on the one.
Okay, well, look, I mean, I mean, really, to pretend I knew the answer would be pretentious. But I mean, I think what am I doing? I am one. I mean, no, how do I phrase? So I support various charities and a political party in which, and a church in which I donate money. So in terms of my income, such as it is, I have got various things I put my money and my mouth into. So so I'm not just a writer who's locked in a kind of study. I mean, I'm engaging with the world. And today, my wife and I, we were putting up an exhibition at the Upton Park Country House in Poole, which involves 6 artists and myself as a poet. And we've got a 2-week exhibition. And I would call this beautiful art. And it's all about heaven. It's all about the doorway, my poem Doorway, which is in terza rima, in Dante's form. And I can't describe my own work as good because that would be pretentious. Other people have got to describe it, but other people have said this is a very moving thing. So we are putting on something that is going to attract somewhere between 500 to 1,000 people. All sorts of people will walk in. There will be people who are woke. There will be people who are not woke. There will be literature available. There'll be somebody to talk to. So in its little way, it's only little, but we are actually putting out good stuff. I attend a church and I want to be a useful member of the church. I try to influence it so far as I can influence it. So, so it's like not compartmenting yourself. I'm not somebody who wants to stand on barricades and, it's just not for me. I write for the Epoch Times and they employ me to write for them for the simple reason they like the whole emphasis I have on order, justice, God. And this is another interesting point. And here's something that is really important to understand. Most people seem to think of morality as something that is so there's law, there's art, there's a whole range of education, and there's morality, and they're all like lots of different disciplines. What we have to understand is that morality actually is a primary discipline that informs all other disciplines, including science. What is being utterly lost is this idea of morality. And I'm not a fundamentalist. I'm not a literist. By writing this book and writing Doorway, anyone can see I'm deeply into metaphorical, symbolic language and trying to understand the complexity and not to bang on about, the Bible says this, so it means that. There's a whole range of things it might possibly mean, and one needs to approach that with reverence and with kind of respect. But the thing is, morality is fundamental, and you'll notice that with woke and with the educational system, the thing it's primarily trying to do all the time as a subtext is undermine morality. The sense that people have at a fundamental level of good and evil. It tries to undermine it. It uses sociology, it uses psychology, it uses any discipline it can find to actually undermine that basic sense that everybody has of morality. And here's the thing about morality. I think it was Socrates, said, and he wasn't writing in the St. Augustine or Thomas Aquinas way, but he was saying that there are two things that demonstrate the existence of God. And that, keeping in mind that Socrates lived 400 or 400 years before Christ. Two things. What were those two things? And they were absolutely polar opposites. One thing that demonstrated the existence of God was the stars above. St. Paul talks about when he talks about men have known from just looking at the stars and looking at the complexity of existence that this has to be something in the mind of a creator. It cannot have arisen accidentally. So the first thing is the stars above tell us that God exists. The second thing is the conscience within. So you've got the external proof. When we look up, we see it. And when we look at nature, we see it. And then actually within ourselves, we feel it. And what we sense with so many of these politicos today, and to be honest with you, this is especially for your American viewers. And if I upset some of them, sorry about this. But, the Biden thing, the concealment of the senility of Joe Biden was an act of surpassing evil. Because the consciences of everybody involved must have been seared to have allowed that to happen in a democratic country. Whatever you think of Trump, leave that aside. But the fact of concealing somebody who's clearly lost it, and was actually leading the world's most powerful country. It's just staggering to contemplate. So the conscience within is absolutely central to our sense of morality. And people know, and actually the homage that vice plays to virtue is hypocrisy.
Yeah.
They keep pretending that they're doing things for the good of people, but in fact, it's all self-motivated.
Well, that's one of the advantage of technology for them, which is they have an auto pen and they just copy Joe Biden's signature. But in the last sort of few minutes, but I will say that what you've just said is really is totally important, because especially, let's make a reference to our own politics now, because we are very, very concerned about what's going on, and we're also wondering, we just feel that, well, I feel this, that we have reached a point where lying seems to be a parliamentary virtue, and that where are people holding this to account, where the fact that people just, I say this about our prime minister, to me, it's all about power. But
well, let me tell you something that's in the book about Sir Keir Starmer. So I'll say it's in the book. You can read this in the book. See, there's a load of stuff that's happened since he's been elected, which is absolutely dreadful, right? But actually, one of the, if not the worst thing of all that Sir Keir Starmer did was before he got elected, actually, and it's what he revealed about himself. And I cite where this comes from in the book, so I can't give you the citation for it now, but it's some article. He was interviewed. And what did we learn about Sir Keir Starmer? One, he had no favorite poem. He had no favorite novel.
Yeah.
And he had no fears when he was a child.
Yeah.
Now, what does that tell you about the soul of somebody who can't remember a poem, can't remember a novel, and actually pretends they had no fears?
Absolutely.
It's somebody who is blanking reality. The mind can only repose upon the stability of truth. And this is, in fact, is it chapter 7 or chapter 8? One of my chapters is called Truth and Mendacium. It's the story of the two twins. One is Veritas, who is true. And the other one is Mendacium, that's the lie. We have this massive lie going through our society. And where is the accountability?
Well, you make absolutely, and you make a reference to Karl Marx in your book, and the fact that you and I feel, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but we are facing, as far as I'm concerned, communism, if not an autocratic or authoritarianism. These are things we're suddenly reading history. We're trying to catch up. You also make a reference to Lenin and the fact that Lenin can't appreciate a beautiful piece of music.
No, he can appreciate it. He has a favorite piece of Beethoven, but he refuses to listen to it because it makes him feel soft towards people and loving.
Right.
So he's absolutely excised it from his own soul.
Absolutely, because
he loved it. You know, people can do such beautiful things. No, I mustn't listen to this because it makes me, people need their heads banged together, is what he actually said.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. Well, it says everything, because then we're concerned that people have lost their empathetic reasoning within this, and actually, as you've said it, you're saying this in your book as well, where you are turning around and saying, where are people, where is the soul of people, where is it? And as you've just referred to, where we're looking deeply and we can't find it. James, before we end, and just say thank you, I feel as though I feel as though I need about 3 or 4 hours in which to paint an arc and get to the bottom of a number of other things. And I just want to thank you for your time. But before you go, could you tell people where they can find you, where they can buy the book? I will put some links in regard to your work at the bottom when I load this up. But where can people find you?
Well, you can find me. Two major websites would be www.jamesale.co.uk. So James Sale, my name, and sale, by the way, is as in a January sale, a sale in a shop, and it's singular, not plural. People always refer to me as sale, James Sales, but it's jamesale.co.uk. Or you will be able to access me via my business website, which is www.motivationalmaps.com, one word, motivationalmaps.com. But I really hang out in social media. I mean, I am on Instagram, I am on Facebook, but my real lovely place where I'm posting all the time is LinkedIn. So if you go on LinkedIn and type in James Sale, there are other substitutes, AirSats James Sales, but the real one will very, very quickly come to the surface and you'll see me there. Do link with me on LinkedIn and say the magic words, Mark Sutherland insists you link with me. If you say that,
I will find brilliant. I will find you on there, James.
Yeah.
Can we do this again? Because there is a lot of things I would love to discuss with you, because we're both we're concerned about very much concerned about the state of the country and the lunatics and the clowns that are running it. And it'd be very good to get your motivational business management on that, where companies are suffering, to say the least. But James, thank you so much for your time. We'll give a shout out to the Bruise Group. I thank Robert Ords for introducing us. And I'm just going to play us out as we're so much against the hour. But James, if you stay with me, once the recording stops, and I'll say goodbye to you on the other side, if that's okay.
Let's see you on the other side.
I'll see you on the other side. Thank you.
Cross the river.
Across the river. Yeah. Cheers, James. Thank you very much indeed
for watching.
Take care.